Hello and welcome back to Kip Crashes. I'm Pocket and I'm joined in this episode by Kip. In today's episode, we're going to be doing the second part of what we began in the last episode by giving advice for young artists or beginner artists and young and beginning writers. In the previous episode, we talked about a variety of different things, mostly touching on visual art and also getting into literary art. So you definitely should watch that video first, which will be linked in the card above. And once you finish watching that video, come here to see the rest of the discussion, where we'll be covering more literary advice, overlap, and some of the worst and best advice that we've ever gotten as artists. So let's get into it.
Now then, another one of the points that I really wanted to hit on while I was doing this is something that I got told a lot but never got actual advice on how to do, which is don't be afraid of a white page. I definitely agree with this. It is absolutely crucial to not be afraid of a white page because if you are, you will never get anything done unless you're writing on purple paper, which I mean, kudos to you. Now, this is a funny thing, because this is something I already gave some advice on. But with this one, my advice is actually slightly different. If you're specifically going in and you have an idea, and you're looking at a white page, and you know what you want to do, but you're scared to do it because you're scared of messing up the page. You're scared of messing up, of somehow, if you write something, then that means you're going to be off on the wrong track. I must introduce you all to this magical feature called the delete key.
Or, of course, the other side of your pencil.
Yes. It's an eraser. I know how freaky a white page can be. And one of the things that I find very specifically with it is this idea of if you start off wrong, your entire chapter will somehow be thrown off. I'm here to tell you that that is distinctly not true. One of the best things you can do with a white page is write. And then erase. And then write. And then erase. And then write. And then, oh, look, that's the first sentence. And then you go on from there. You're always going to be writing and erasing. That is how writing fundamentally goes. And if you don't erase during your process, which kudos to you, you will find that you have to erase later on. That is editing. You will always be erasing, which means you fundamentally can't mess up. Well, you can fundamentally mess up, but here's the thing. You can't mess up in a way that you can't fix. That is the magic of technology, because let me tell you, someone who started off their writing in notebooks, the power of the delete key and of copy and paste is strong.
As someone who still writes on paper whenever I write, basically, I envy you all.
The
Demon.
power.
Demon, I'm a tactile thinker.
No, that's perfectly valid. I still do that as well sometimes. But
That's fair.
seriously, if you have the power to be able to do that, wield it and wield it wisely. Go ahead and use that to strike down your fear of the white page, because it's not a fear that's actually going to help you.
Yep, and very similarly, of course, with art, my advice will always be the same. Just scribble. If you're afraid of your sketchbook, I know a lot of people have this issue with starting new sketchbooks. Hop into the middle of it and just scribble on the entire page, and then take ink and outline what you think are shapes. It doesn't have to be pretty. We've been over this. Sketchbooks don't have to look good. But don't be afraid of the white page. It's not your enemy. And if you're looking at a nice piece of paper for an illustration, well, then very lightly with like a 10H pencil, outline what you're going to do. The paper's no longer white and you have your plan on it. Of course, if you're afraid of the white canvas on digital, you can turn off layers. It's fine. You'll be okay. There's literally no messing up. And if anyone's ever watched me draw digitally, for the most part, I just scribble and scribble and scribble until I find what I want to do.
Yep, that's what I tend to do whenever I'm running into struggles with starting a chapter, for instance. Is especially I find with chapters, the blank page gets a little bit more scary because you've done well in the past, so now you might mess up. Okay, in that case, do exactly what Pocket suggested. Outline. It's what in this one spot, I will concede that school skills can translate. Make an outline. If
Or,
you
of
have
course, go ahead.
If you have an outline, you can always come back and then reference it. It's incredibly useful. Now, I know that for some, especially myself, outlines don't work as well with that. Okay, write gibberish. I'm not kidding. I'm not kidding. Keyboard smash. Keyboard smash. And if you keyboard smash and you look at a letter that has been keyboard smashed in, sometimes a word will come to your mind and it might just be the right word. I know that it sounds like I'm relying on luck here. I am. That's what writing is past a point. It's the luck that a character will come and tell you their story and that you'll be able to tell their story to the world.
And another piece of my advice is actually very similar, and is mess up intentionally. If you're so terrified that you're going to mess up, especially if you're going to mess up a sketchbook or a digital drawing, then just mess up intentionally. Create an entire page where you tell yourself you're going to draw the face characteristically wrong, or you're going to draw dragons with wings for feet. Mess up intentionally. Scribble, doodle, put red next to black. I'm told it's a horrible combination. I like it a
Wait,
rather
why?
lot.
It looks good.
It does, but do all the things that you think are sacrilege. I have found that some of the pages where I sat down with the intent of messing something up are the same pages that I came up with really good ideas out of. Never be afraid to mess up, because art is just a series of mistakes.
Yeah, nothing is ever perfect in art. It's kind of like, for those out there who know theater, some of the best moments that you will ever get on stage are the moments when the actors messed up and somehow incorporated that into the scene. If you're bouncing a ball and it accidentally goes at someone's head and they catch it and then turn and look at you with fury and deliver their line, that's a moment for the record books. And no, that totally didn't make my high school play. What are you talking about? And actually, on that note, I'd like to impart to you guys with one of my favorite quotes of Pocket's. Nothing is sacred. And with that, why don't we go ahead and go into the overlap? Because, my God, is that a good piece of advice for the arts.
Indeed. To expand upon it, because it's my quote, you thief.
I said it was yours.
Indeed, you did. Nothing is sacred. It sounds vague, and I don't disagree, but the truth is that when you're drawing, when you're writing, when you're creating to any capacity, nothing is sacred. Nothing can't be reworked or thrown away or torn apart and then revamped. No matter what you're doing, never be afraid to take it apart and put it back together again. Never be afraid to change the gender of your character, change the color of their hair if it suits your story. I know that especially as a young artist, when I created characters or concepts, I got so attached to them that I was afraid to play with them or to change them. And that ended up hindering them a lot more than it ended up helping them. Similarly, I got so attached to the piece of paper I was looking at, or the fact that one sketch in the corner looked good, that I never really expanded upon it. I didn't do anything else with that page because I was afraid of ruining it. But in the end, I ended up with one page less of sketch practice. So I don't know how better to explain it, but just allow me to impart this upon you. Nothing in the arts is sacred, and everything can be burned to the ground.
Yep. I think that's something that I especially found when I started working on my first sequel. No, I'm not a published author. Don't look for my work. But when I started first working on a sequel, I think the biggest thing I was scared of was, is it going to be as good as the original? Maybe I should just stop. I think I've already managed the best that I can do. And I think that's the biggest problem with this sort of thing, is this idea of hitting a pinnacle with art. You've never hit your pinnacle with art. There's never a point that you can get to where your art is now perfect. It is now the best it can be. That's the beauty of art. You can continue to grow. Your art will always continue to grow if you give it the room to. And I did take the leap of faith with that sequel, and it's managed to take my artwork to a completely different level, and to take the story in ways I never could have dreamed it was going to, and in ways that the first story could never have. Now then, something that we promised you guys we would talk about when we hit the overlap is the devil's in the details. Now, I'm claiming first on this one. I'm claiming dibs because I didn't talk last time on this. So, details. Obviously, with writing, first thing that comes to mind with details is diction. And that is correct. But here's the problem that you get all the time when you think of diction, which is SAT words. Now, everybody supposes that writers have an incredibly wide vocabulary, they're very verbose, and they're very succinct. Not necessarily. Well, certainly a lot of the ones that I know do have that tendency. They just also have the tendency to forget half of the words that they are trying to say, as poor Pocket knows, since I had to ask them translate because I kept saying transpose earlier. Wrong word, Kip. Half the time when you talk to authors, you can't tell they're authors. But when you look at the page, what you see are words that will give you impressions. Those are the right words, not the ones that are incredibly long. They are not the ones you will find in scientific articles, I swear to God. They are words like squelch, I'm going to go ahead and reference Wings of Fire by Toy T. Sutherland with page 85. This was one of my favorite moments, and I actually, when Pocket was reading it to me, made them stop because I wanted to talk about it, because I loved it so much, which is when Clay, as a tiny, tiny spoiler, spends the first time in mud. He's a mudwing. He likes it. And he says, for the first time ever, his claws didn't ache, his scales didn't itch, his wings didn't feel too dry, and he wasn't worried about stubbing his talons every other step. He felt the mud squelch into the gaps between his scales and realized that the pain from the cave poison was fading, as if the mud was healing him. That specific word, squelch, is perfect because it brings to mind, at the very least with me, playing around in the mud as a little kid. It brings to mind the rain and the bright raincoats and the silly little boots and the squelch, squelch, squelch and the very cute sounds. And that is crucial because it creates an image and it creates an auditory response. Not scientifically, but it creates an auditory response. That is the sort of thing you need. You need evocative words. You do not need SAT words. You need words that are going to make impressions, that are going to bring out images and memories and sounds for your reader. That's what's going to really bring a page to life. And that is very much you look at one word and you change it, and you will change the entire meaning of that scene. And I can feel a lot of you going, well, that's incredibly intimidating. How do I know the right word? You're probably going to miss it a lot of the time. No author will find that on every single page or in every single scene. But when you find it, you will transform your work, and it's worth it to look for it.
Similarly, on details and diction, I want to talk about details and diction in illustration, which might sound a little weird because diction doesn't sound like something you would have in illustration, but it is, and it's specifically in details and how many of them you use. Oftentimes you'll find these intricate drawings where you can almost feel every scale of the dragon or every tuft of fur on the puppy. When you look a little closer, you notice that there are only maybe 10 scales on the entire dragon, and the fur is sparingly there at best. While some people communicate this by adding every strand of fur and carefully crafting it all together, as I'll probably have an example on the screen if I can find one, others use it a little more sparingly, by using specific dots to indicate that they're fur to allow more of the attention to go to the actual drawing. This is where it gets a little bit complicated and gets into this wonderful, terrible forest called style, something that we'll talk about at a separate time. But the devil's in the details in two ways. On the one hand, you have to be willing to add detail and look at your drawing and find where you can embellish it to give it that next level of detail. I remember at one point watching a YouTube video of someone drawing and looking at it and going, he's not drawing any better than I am. Why does his art look so much better than mine? And I realized it was because he was taking the time to draw out every line and every detail, even in the furthest parts. On the other hand, when I draw dragons, you'll notice I rarely detail out every single scale. This is because I don't feel like it adds anything to the drawing. Rather, it takes away from it if you point out every scale in the way that I draw dragons. So I think what it comes down to really is finding the devil, figuring out where in the details he is, and not going too far in either direction. But it is also up to interpretation, so take this all and do with it as you will. You'll see on screen probably some examples of different detail levels and how they can all be rendered in a way that looks good. You just have to find what works for you.
What to what? This is also something that can apply shockingly well to writing. Something that I received a lot of critiques for was my flowery writing while I was growing up. And everyone told me to make it more concise. And while I definitely agreed that I needed more concise writing, and I've come a long way in that since I was younger, I also think that past a point, the flowery writing was a choice. It was an artistic choice, and it's something that is hard to achieve. Here's how you achieve that in a way that is not annoying, or takes away from the piece, or makes you forget after you describe the mist and the fog in such lucid terms that you forget you're on a mountain and have things to do. Mary Shelley.
I hear Frankenstein complaining in the background.
Mm-hmm.
He's being drab again. Shut him up.
Two things that I was told by a professional author, which is every single word is important and must earn its space on the page. along with that idea of diction that I mentioned before. Having a very concise diction can be important in terms of finding that one word that you really need. However, as anyone that's read 19th century literature can attest, a lot of the writing there is very flowery. But as long as it doesn't go into useless details, it's rather interesting and tends to enhance the piece. There's a reason classics are still classics and are taught today. The way that this works is because every single word there has to enhance the story. I'm going to bring up one of my favorite examples with this, which will always be Terry Pratchett. Terry Pratchett does use a very flowery language. Here's the thing. Most people don't notice because every single word seems necessary. You cannot have the image he presents without it. However, if you look at his language, it is a genuinely flowery language. It's just also important. You don't need to have unnecessary words to be have flowery language. If you have a flowery artistic style and aren't just messing up, if you have a genuinely flowery artistic style, there is nothing wrong with that, regardless of what everyone will try to tell you. Just make sure that all of your words have an impact and enhance the story somehow. Now, going back to something that Pocket said earlier on not giving everything on the page, that's something that is especially difficult for authors to figure out as well. Because how much is your audience going to get? Are you overdoing it? Are you underdoing it? Will they actually understand what you're saying, or will they completely misinterpret it, or just not understand how that character's feeling at all in the moment without having to very closely read it, which is not your job as an author. What you need to do with that sort of thing, and that's something I've been told a lot recently, and that I only found out, I'm going to go back with that, if that's okay.
Yeah, go for it.
A tip I found on that very recently that I have found incredibly effective has to be expressing emotions through actions. And that's not saying he tilted his head inquisitively. It's saying he tilted his head. And he tilted his head and waited. They'll know that he's waiting for an explanation. And certainly one thing that I learned very quickly with this is that each character will have their own way of expressing emotions. It's one of the joys of being an author, is finding out how your character is going to express emotions. This is something that I also think is a very useful tool that you can use. One of the things that I love doing is giving one of my characters, or, maybe more, a physical cue. For instance, playing with a pocket watch, let's say. Pocket. Damn it. Playing with a watch, let's say. Or let's say looking around. No, that's a bad one. So playing with a watch, let's say, or curling their hair, or tapping the table. That's a very common one. Or if you need something quieter, tapping their knee. Something that is very in character. And then just have someone note at some point, or you don't even necessarily have to have them note it, depending on how universal the action is. But if you want it to be very character specific, and certainly in terms of the emotions very character specific, what you can do is have somebody, or maybe even themselves, explain very subtly what this means to the audience, and then every single time it's used afterwards, the audience will be able to pick up on what it means and how the character is feeling as soon as they start doing it.
One of my favorite examples of this actually comes from a show for kids, tweens, I don't know, called Backstage, where two of the characters have been friends since kindergarten. And the first one has a tick that you would kind of figure out is one of the characters has a tick where you would kind of figure out is from anxiety, but she pulls on her ear a lot when I think she's lying or something. And in one of the episodes, she's lying to her good friend, and said friend just very casually goes, "Come on, Carly, I know you're lying because you're pulling on your ear." It was very smooth because she was pointing it out to the character, not to the audience. But every time after that Carly tries to lie to someone, she goes for her ear, and the entire audience knows immediately that she's lying, even if in universe none of the characters around her do.
Another excellent example of this is Liv and Maddie, where in one of the very first episodes we get to see also an incredible moment of how close the twins are. When one of them says, "Oh, it's about a boy," and the other says, "Oh, how do you know?" And they say, "You always play with your bracelet when you get flustered." And then there's an incredibly cute moment later where the other one impersonates their twin to try and help them ask out a boy. And not as any sort of spoilers, but let's just say the boy makes a reference later to the fact that he noticed it as well. This is something that instantly sets up the idea that the boy really likes the twin, and that he's observant enough to notice something only their other twin notices. This sets up the idea that he's very close to her, and also sets up a very nice twin dynamic, while implying that we now know a little bit more about one of the twins than we would have before. Using it in a way that's not forced is absolutely crucial. If you want or for instance, if you have somebody that's talking about how a character lies a lot and they have a friend that knows how to tell the difference, a nice way to do this would just be to have them say, "Oh yeah, if you need a tip, this is how you can know that they're lying." Little bit forced, but not as much.
Just I beg if you don't have, they played with their ear. Therefore, you could tell they were lying because they were playing with their ear.
Oh God,
I've read
please
that
don't
in
do that.
published novels before,
No,
guys.
ho, ho, ho. Also, fun fact, you will almost always find a show or a novel or a poem or a something that makes you go, what is this person doing that can have them be published when I'm not? The answer is probably nothing. You will always find work that you are better than, and you will always find work that is better than you. That is how it'll work whether you're published or unpublished. And finally, something that we can conclude with in this is the best advice that we have been given artistically and the worst.
I'll take
It
it
was
first.
hard to pick.
I'll take it first just because my best piece of advice is one that I'm actually quite fond of and has actually molded my art for 5 years. A friend of mine's father, who is a graphic designer and comic book colorist, once told me that there are enough pretty pictures out there, sitting doing nothing for no one. But if your picture tells a story no one has ever heard before, then you have added something to the world. There can never, never be too many stories. And this is something that has shaped my art for years now. The goal not just to create a picture that is pretty or nice to look at, but a picture that tells a story or imparts an emotion upon my viewers. Rather than just making something because it's pretty, I make something because it means something. And I think that that really makes the difference.
I think that that's a really amazing quote. It's something that is incredibly important for all forms of art. Always know why you're doing something. Now, my quote comes from one instance where I was lucky enough to get to meet and talk to a published author. And I asked her a couple of questions, and in response to one in particular, she said, "Someone will always be offended by your work. Try to limit it because, you're a decent human being. But don't obsess over it because you'll always help someone too." This is one of my favorite quotes because, especially in today's world, we try incredibly hard to not step on any toes. If you try too hard to do that with your art, you're going to make something meaningless because you haven't said anything. Once you are no longer offending anyone, it's because you are not saying a thing. What you need to be able to do is limit how many people you are hurting, because you have to understand that there is always going to be someone that is helped by your art. And also, as Tim Gunn said, you're obsessing. Stop it.
And now on to the worst. I'll take this one again first because, I don't like this quote. A lot of times when I was a child, people would tell me, don't draw anything until you've mastered the fundamentals. Well, here's a little spoiler. To master the fundamentals, you need to draw. And just in general, as a young artist, your priority should be drawing if you want to draw. I never understood this quote much and ended up disregarding it, but a good friend of mine as a child who also wanted to go into art ended up giving up because he thought that he had to master how to do line work and form and shape and value before he could draw Pikachu. We were 7. There was no need for this.
Yeah, this was also, and on the note of giving up because of some really bad advice, one of the worst pieces of advice I've gotten in my entire life was when someone said to me, "Don't go into anything related to animation. It's a dying art form." Dying art form, first off, that is something we're going to talk about later because, my God, have I heard that a lot. But
Same.
as somebody that has a deep love of basically everything animated, that was something that cut very deep because I had been actually, for a while, intrigued on going into some form of animation, even potentially the art side of it. But hearing that made me go, okay, I guess I need to think about this from a logical standpoint. And I ended up walking away from it, only to come back years later and decide that I wanted to write for animations. While I still have a deep love for novels and intend to write several of and intend to write several of those as well. Animation is definitely where my true passion is. And having that said to me and having that reinforced very continuously only hampered my ability to do what I was meant to do.
So with that, thank you everyone for watching and tuning in to another Kip Crashes. Tell us if you like this, what you didn't like, and what you want to see next time.
And please give better advice than those things we ended on.
Please give better advice to young artists.
Please.
And with that, we'll catch you next time with another video of Kip Crashes.
See ya!